In the February 1991 edition of Life magazine, Republican Lee Atwater spoke of a spiritual vacuum in America. To begin with, I do believe that there is a spiritual crisis in America, and I believe that it is accountable for a lot of our homicides and a lot of the horrific incidents that we see more and more in the news. You know, I feel almost weird reporting on which one at this point, because these are no longer popular events. In a way, the prophet Andy Warhol came true in the sense that everyone will get their 15 minutes of fame, and now, even with these mass murderers, they disappear from the news cycle almost instantly. As this phony story of Trump emptying a box of fish food into a koi pond, or somehow violating Japanese customs, stole headlines in CNN and in The Guardian. These things are no longer that interesting to us, not because they never were, but just because we're starting to get bored with the old formula time and time again. But that doesn't mean there are still people to profit from this cycle, and that doesn't mean there are still people to get famous. And when you consider more than just the tragedy of the lives that were just shattered by the deaths and the relationships, in both that church and in Vegas, and insert the number of last mass shootings, more than just the victims and their families, and more than just the people who immediately get lots of media attention, whether they're in the role of hero or victim or villain or whatever hierarchy of person that we automatically class these different types of people into, and they're automatically tailor-made for the media to perceive as. We also have the people who profit from these crimes indirectly, including the media networks. Which brings me to something amusing that I saw on Paul Joseph Watson's channel. And Paul Joseph Watson, he makes great videos, and he's quite funny, but I thought it was really just in poor taste that he brought on this character, this man. I guess he's a real human being. Let's be honest with ourselves. But Park Dietz, and I could recognize him right away without having a name card or anything. I knew him exactly from a lot of true crime documentaries that I've seen. Kind of a morbid fascination with true crime that I've always had, and he is often in these talking about the motives of serial killers. And in this one clip, he's going on and on about this, in this rant about how, well, you won't have these mass murderers, you won't have psychopaths if we stop the media attention. And he's sitting there on camera making money saying this. And I'm just thinking, again, sometimes when you see a lack of self-awareness, it just really hits you in the face. And that was just one of those situations, like, come on, dude, you're making money off this. Everyone with a camera pointed, everyone who is drawing attention to it, with the exception of yours truly, is somehow profiting or gaining from this. Anyway, where do we draw the line? It's kind of like this, the consideration about crime that I was thinking before, like, to what extent is the public entitled to information? People were upset that they took down this latest shooters, the Texas shooters, Facebook account. They took down everything, and that's becoming an increasingly popular habit where they go and they stamp out all of these social media sites. And I don't know if it's part of just curtailing that sense of fame or whatever. I don't know if many of these killers are in it for fame, or they do it Elliot Rodgers style, where they send out a long-winded, just painfully dysfunctional manifesto or something. So I'm not even sure why they do it. It just makes it more and more strange. If we even say that fame is a motive, then what happens? Or are we given the impression that these people just completely delete their lives, and maybe they have this a cache of ego, this storehouse of uh, old diaries and old blogs and stuff like that that they secretly want the world to see when they're gone, but that's hidden from them. Whatever. The one thing that's really going to work against the popularity of these mass murderer psychos is that they're just becoming way too common now, and everything's been done. You know, it's like uh, it, it's like the darkest, most sinister form of expression that has no. I mean, especially when you mature and come to your senses and you realize that it's not like people in a movie or something, but these are real human beings, and you consider just knowing people in your own life, people who died before their time, and what a how that just kind of jolts your world, just completely makes everything tremble for a while. But we become more and more used to it, and we're actually happier with the simulations than with the actual people anyway. I don't know how much we know about this latest character, but I think he was a huge gamer or something, or he spent his time lost in just fantasy worlds, and we all do to some extent. But I think it's like when Stefan Molyneux points out that there's this fantasy of who you are and who you're becoming, and then there's this reality of it, and some people just lose the plot entirely. And maybe I do agree with Park Dietz when he says that we should stamp out the celebrity of these mass criminals. But I don't know if it's something that we can do simply as a moral choice when you've got, and this has been pointed out, like Anne Rule, for example, the great true crime writer. She was a personal friend of Ted Bundy's, and Ted Bundy blamed detective magazines on inspiring him to do a lot of these killings, and yet he also praised her for her reporting on criminal behavior. So anyway, these thoughts are just a bit out there, but it's fine to get theoretical, I guess. And when you look at it as a spiritual crisis, I think it makes a lot of sense when you're dealing with Americans. Because there is a very, fuck you attitude among a lot of American expats that I know out here as well. And each country has it in a different way, but we get singled out for it a lot. As part of what I talked about earlier, this whole idea of the American stigma, where we're perceived as jackasses, and Trump is supposed to be like a personification. Since we got him elected, we're somehow a direct reflection of his personality. Which takes us back to Atwater's comment in Life magazine, the idea that there is a spiritual vacuum, and he personified that as the free-willing luxury of the 80s, where people were just making lots and lots of money, I guess. Allegedly. There's supposed to be a great boom. But at the same time, I know places like New York City where we're still quite ridden with crime. And there was decay, a lot of decay in our infrastructure, but at the same time, money was being made. But I wasn't around back then. I did read The Art of the Deal, but who knows how much of that. I mean, that's ego writing at its finest. It's not quite on the level of what happened, but it's ego writing in the sense that he really loves himself, but it's ghost written. So it's not like kissing your own ass as directly as writing a book by yourself, talking about how great you are. Which I've mentioned it like 4 times already, but it's just hilarious. And I actually reread part of it because I wanted to get at this Atwater quote, talking about the decadence of the 80s. Oh, the decadence of the 70s, decadence of the 60s, decadence of the 2000s. Like, okay, come on, have some perspective here, really. It's always the worst time. It's always the most important election. It's always the biggest Super Bowl. Of course, we have to live in the present, but at the same time, our lives are still on a track in some sense. But I of course got into some talks about gun control online because that's what I do. Because trolling it's a way of giving me ideas for this video. Because who knows what I would talk about otherwise? Rubik's cubes or something. But this this Brit, I guess, from the UK, Brit, I'd assume, maybe Scott, I don't know. But he says that Americans just shrug and they're not going to do anything, and this is just the American character. They don't care. They don't care enough to reform their gun laws. We don't have gun murders in the UK. Basically his point. Basically the same point that they all make. And and essentially what he did was I should really have these in front of me. What's going on? My point, anyway, is that I said you can still be pro-gun control without wanting to change gun laws. And that when we look at it, the places with the strictest gun laws, like Chicago, has the highest rate of gun homicide. And often, I don't know to what extent all of these shooters are. It's getting harder and harder to come up with individual examples because there are so many in our news cycle. But a lot of them are still able to obtain guns illegally. Which isn't to say we shouldn't do anything, but I'm just saying that. But even the Brits have their guns of Brixton. Anyway, I think that without changing our Constitution, without changing our Bill of Rights, without some crazy amendment, or without further restrictions on gun ownership, we can make it so that it's only the good guys with the guns. Which might sound very idealistic, but I think that the answer lies in addressing that spiritual vacuum. I think it's terrible that so many of these killers are on prescription drugs, and something needs to be done to stop prescription drugs. I think that would make a considerable difference. I also think, in general, just an improvement in person-to-person relations. It was said that after the attacks in 9/11 New York City, there was just a bonding of all the people, just an outpouring of caring for everyone who was there. And by the time I got there, I remember talking to someone who complained about how that was just gone and people were assholes again. But it's not about, slacktivism, simple outward expressions of love. I think that the real thing that we need to do, and I'm echoing the sentiments of just people that I've heard online, like Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux, we need to address the evil within us all, and I think it needs to be an inward struggle to settle things with our conscience. And maybe in our hearts to even forgive people who do things like this. Just like it was that Amish community years ago. I remember an Amish church got shot up. We've had a few church shootings. It's pretty sick, I must say. It makes me sick to talk about and to think about. But there was that Amish church where everyone there agreed to forgive. And just the spiritual power behind that, the blessing behind that is really inspirational in these dark times. Which isn't to say we all need to become Amish or something, but as someone who has studied and prayed and worshipped in many places, I just feel like and I've looked at the alternatives. I've read all the Richard Dawkins and all that stuff, and some of it's good, and a lot of it's good, but I just feel like the world just needs more God